By July, my garden usually feels like it's fighting me a little. The soil is hot, early crops are already worn out, leaves start getting spotty, pests show up more often, and after just a few minutes outside in the sun, you start wondering if those seed trays should just stay inside. That's why I get why a lot of people look at their garden in July and think, yeah, the planting season is probably over. But that's exactly the trap that shuts gardens down too early. July isn't when you plant everything, but it's also not when you stop planting. It's when you get pickier about what still has enough time to pay off. Some crops are just too slow to start now, but others, cucumbers, zucchini, basil, and a few fall crops, can still give you another wave if you time it right. I don't start by asking what zone you're in. I start with two simpler things: your first frost date and the days to maturity on the seed packet. Instead of one messy list, I break it down into clear groups: fast crops, fall crops, crops worth waiting on, and a few interesting options for hotter regions. Because you're not done gardening yet, if you pick the right seeds, July can still turn into a pretty solid second wave in your garden. Before sowing, count the days left in the season. Before I plant anything in July, I don't just look at my USDA zone. What matters more is how many warm days I actually have left before the weather starts to turn. Here's how I usually figure it out. I take the average first frost date for my area and count backward from today. If it's early July, and my first frost usually comes in early October, that gives me roughly 90 days to work with. Then I check the seed packet and look at how many days that plant needs to reach maturity. If it says 50 to 60 days, I'm in a good spot. If it says 90 to 100 days, I slow down and think twice. I also like to add a small buffer, usually around 10 to 14 days. Late in the season, the days get shorter. Temperatures can swing faster, and plants usually don't grow as steadily as they do in spring. If you only have about 50 to 60 days left, I'd stick with fast crops. That's when I'm thinking about cucumbers, zucchini, basil, green onions, or anything with a short harvest window. If you've got around 70 to 100 days, you have more room to work with. You can still start early fall tomatoes, cooler season herbs like parsley, small melons, or a few crops that take a little longer but still have time to finish. If you've got more than 100 days, you can even look at longer season crops like gourds, onions, shallots, or other warm season plants. But even then, I still lean toward faster varieties instead of the slowest ones. For fast growers like cucumbers and zucchini, I'll usually direct sow them or start them in small trays and move them out early. For plants that need a little more control, like tomatoes or parsley, I start them in trays so I can manage water, light, and heat more easily. The big thing in July is keeping seed trays from drying out. The heat can dry the surface fast, so I keep the soil evenly moist, place trays in morning sun or light afternoon shade, and check them every day. So the real question isn't, can I still plant in July? It's, how many days do I have left? How many days does this plant need? And what's the best way to help it actually make it before the season ends? Fast crops, cucumbers, and zucchini. The first crops I think about in July are cucumbers and zucchini. They don't need a long, full season to prove themselves. If the soil is still warm and you've got enough days left, they can give you a fresh round of production pretty quickly. I put them first, not just because they grow fast, but because a lot of gardeners hang on to early season plants for too long. The cucumber vines are already yellowing, the zucchini is starting to deal with pests and disease, but we keep trying to squeeze a little more out of them. I've done that myself. I kept watering, kept trimming, kept waiting, like those July plants were somehow going to bounce back and look like spring plants again. But sometimes the plant doesn't need saving anymore. Sometimes the garden just needs a younger start. With cucumbers and zucchini, I like to think in waves. When the older plants start wearing out, I don't count on them to carry the whole season. I start a new round so that by late summer, I still have plants that are young, strong, and ready to produce. The important number here is time. Cucumbers and zucchini can germinate in just a few days in warm soil, and many varieties are ready to harvest in about 45 to 60 days. If you've still got around 60 days before frost, they're absolutely worth considering. If the soil is warm and I have open space, I usually direct sow them right into the garden. I only start them in trays if the heat is too intense, or if I'm not quite ready with the planting spot yet. Then I move them out early. For cucumbers, if I have a trellis, I get the new plants climbing from the start. Younger vines stay more open, they're easier to check, and it's a lot easier to catch problems before they spread. For zucchini, I'm careful not to crowd them in July. These plants need airflow around the base and leaves, because late summer heat, humidity, and pests can weaken them fast. Those first few days after planting matter a lot. Even a crop planted at the right time can fail if the soil dries out during that first week. In July, drying out too early can be just as bad as planting too late. So, with cucumbers and zucchini, I don't try to drag tired plants all the way to the end of the season. Sometimes the best way to keep harvesting is to stop depending on the old plants and start a younger wave while there's still time. Fall crops, tomatoes, basil, and parsley. The next group I think about in July is not for an instant harvest. These are the plants I start now so that when the weather cools down, the garden isn't only left with tired crops from spring. The big one in this group is fall tomatoes. In many hot, humid parts of the southern U.S., spring-planted tomatoes start fading in July or August because of heat, humidity, and leaf disease. So instead of waiting until the old plants completely crash, I start a fresh round in trays. I look for early varieties, compact plants, or cherry tomatoes with shorter maturity times, usually around 55 to 70 days. If you're in a shorter season area where frost comes early, you have to be more careful with fall tomatoes. When there just aren't enough days left, I skip the big varieties and choose faster crops, instead of trying to push a plant that probably won't finish in time. Basil works the same way. Early season basil can get old, start flowering, grow smaller leaves, and lose some of that fresh flavor. A new July planting gives me younger, better leaves for late summer and early fall. Parsley is slower than basil, but it's still worth getting started early. Once cooler weather comes back, an established parsley plant is much more useful than trying to start one from scratch at that point. This group works best when you still have about 70 to 100 days left, or when your fall season is long enough for new plants to actually matter. In hot regions, this is a way to replace worn-out crops. In cooler regions, it means choosing only the fastest varieties. So, July isn't just about harvesting what you planted in spring. It's also the time to set up the next wave so the garden can move into fall with younger, stronger plants that still have a real job to do. Plant now, harvest later. Gourds, onions, and shallots. After the fast crops and the fall crops, there's another group I think about in July. These plants won't reward you right away, but if the timing is right, they can give you something that lasts a lot longer. I used to care mostly about fast results in the garden. Sow the seeds, watch them sprout, harvest something a few weeks later. But over time, I've realized some crops are worth growing not because they're quick, but because they carry you further into the season. Bottle gourd is the clearest example. It's not as quick as zucchini, and it's not something I'd force into July if my season is already too short. But if you still have enough warm days left, it can be worth the wait. Since bottle gourd needs close to 90 to 100 days, I don't try to squeeze it into a season that's already running out. If there aren't enough days left, I'd rather switch to something faster, or give that space to a crop with a better chance of finishing. The value of bottle gourd shows up later. When it's harvested at the right time, the hard shell lets it store much longer than most fresh vegetables. It's not just food for that week. It can become something you keep for months. Onions and shallots work the same way. They won't change the garden in just a few weeks, but months later, they can make you glad you planted them back in July. With onions, I pay attention to the variety and the day length. If they don't fully size up, they can still be used as green onions. I just harvest lightly from the leaves, because those leaves are helping the plant keep building the bulb. So this group is not about quick wins. Some seeds are worth planting because they make you think further ahead. Plant now, wait a little longer, and get something that can pay you back later in the season. Bonus options for hot regions: small melons and lemongrass. This last group is not for every garden. I only think about it when my area still has plenty of hot days left after July, or when I can grow in containers and have a little more control. For melons, I don't go for big watermelons that take forever to finish. I look for smaller varieties, something more personal-sized, quicker to mature, and easier on space in both the garden and the fridge. Before planting, I always check the days to maturity on the seed packet. If it needs more time than I have left in my warm season, I skip it. If the timing still works, I direct sow into warm soil, keep the moisture steady during the first week, and give the vines enough room to spread or stay low. With small melons in July, I don't overplant. A few strong plants with enough sun, steady water, and less competition usually do better than a crowded patch, because there isn't much time left in the season to fix mistakes. Lemongrass is a little different. It's not a main crop for every July garden, but in a container it becomes much more flexible, especially in colder regions where you can move it indoors when the weather changes. That makes lemongrass a nice bonus plant, useful in the kitchen, aromatic, and easy to keep on a patio or near a sunny window. But I only grow it when there's still enough warmth left, or when I actually have a place to overwinter the pot. So don't let the bonus category make the decision harder than it needs to be. If your season still has time, small melons or lemongrass can be worth trying. If the season is already too short, skip them and use that space for faster, more reliable crops instead. After looking at all the crops I can still start in July, there's another part that matters just as much: the seeds I choose not to plant right now. July is not a reason to dump everything left in the seed box into the soil. When there aren't enough days left, I stop right there. I don't try to make the season fit my plans, and I don't plant something just because I wish it were in the garden. Large watermelons are a clear example. If the hot season is still long enough, they can be worth trying. But if cooler weather is coming soon, I'd rather switch to faster small melons, or skip them completely and give that space to something more reliable. I'm also careful with large-fruited or late-maturing tomatoes. In July, I don't want a plant spending weeks just building vines and leaves, only to run into shorter days and cooler weather before it can finish. I treat other long-season crops the same way. If they need more time than my season can realistically give them, I don't see that as a failure. I see it as a seed that belongs in a different season. Another mistake is planting just because there are still seeds left in the packet. I used to do that, and a few weeks later I'd realize the plants came up fine. But there wasn't enough time left for them to produce anything meaningful. Just because something grows doesn't mean it was the right call. July makes me get more honest. If a crop won't finish in time, I'd rather give that space to faster plants like cucumbers, zucchini, basil, green onions, or anything that still has a real chance to succeed. So July doesn't reward the gardener who plants the most. It rewards the gardener who knows what to leave out, so the time, water, soil, and effort go toward seeds that still have a real shot. How I decide which seeds to plant. When I'm planning my July seed starting, I usually lay all my seed packets out in front of me. But I don't start by picking what I like the most. I start by asking which crops still have a real chance with the time I have left. The first thing I do is pull out anything that simply won't have enough time. If a crop takes too long to mature, I set it aside right away, even if it's something I really wanted to grow this year. Then I sort what's left into 3 simple groups: seeds I can direct sow, seeds I should start in trays, and seeds I should save for next season. That one step keeps me from planting just because I'm excited in the moment. For fast crops like cucumbers, zucchini, or small melons, I'll direct sow if the soil is already warm and I have the space, but I only do that when I know I can keep the soil evenly moist during those first few critical days. For fall tomatoes, basil, or parsley, I usually start them in trays so I can control the sun, water, and temperature more easily. July heat can be rough on seedlings, so I like to give them a little more attention before they go into the garden. Finally, I write down the sowing date. Nothing fancy, just enough to know when the seeds went in. So, a few weeks later, I'm not guessing whether a plant is slow, right on track, or no longer worth keeping. Final thought: don't stop planting, just plant smarter. July is not the end of seed starting season, but it's also not the same as early spring, when you had plenty of time to experiment and fix mistakes later. From this point on, every seed packet needs a better reason to go into the ground. I'm not just asking if it will grow, I'm asking if it still has enough time to finish and give me something useful before the season ends. If my season is short, I stick with fast crops. If I still have plenty of time left, I can think a little bigger. But either way, I don't let July turn into a random planting spree. The biggest shift for me is that skipping a seed packet doesn't feel like losing anymore. Sometimes saving it for next season is the smarter move, because the garden I have right now needs space and time for crops that can still make it. Skipping a slow crop is not missing out. It's how I protect my soil, my water, and my effort for the seeds that actually have a chance to turn the rest of the season into something worthwhile. So don't stop planting just because it's July. July isn't the end of the planting season. It's the point where good gardeners stop planting everything and start planting what actually makes sense.